Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
So if we look back to 2020 and keep track of all the things that year threw at us, Dicamba registration being yanked or the label being vacated was one of those. As you're preparing to make your spraying applications, you might be wondering what's going on with that. Maybe you're following some of the lawsuits that are happening. So we've brought Dr. Mark Loux and Peggy Kirk Hall on with us to discuss the legalities, what's going on with the label, and why this happened and kind of where it's headed. So if you guys would introduce yourselves to our listeners.
Mark Loux, extension weed scientist with Ohio State, been here for 89 years, no, 33 years.
And I'm Peggy Hall. I direct OSU Extension's Agricultural and Resource Law Program. I've been here about half as long as Mark, maybe, give or take.
And you guys have both been guests before, probably multiple times. So we appreciate you joining us again for this topic.
Yeah, I think a lot of farmers, with all the uncertainty and drama that happened last year, are curious, where do we currently stand with this year's registration?
In 2020, I guess right now, the EPA issued a label for 5 years, made a few changes to how you can use the dicamba products. We lost Fexapan. After all this, Corteva declined to actually keep their registration for Fexapan. So we have Ingenia, Extendamax, and then we have Tavium, and Tavium's a mix of dicamba with metolachlor. So they made a few tweaks on the label. One of the biggest things they did was put a June 30th cutoff place. Depends on the product. Ingenia, you can go all the way to June 30th, regardless of growth stage. With Extendamax, you have to cut it off at R1 or June 30th, whichever happens first. And Tavium, it's a V4 because it's a product that has residual, so it's geared for an early post-emergence. So it's either V4 or June 30th, whichever comes first. So I guess if you planted really late, you could still have June 30th as your cutoff there. They made a few changes in terms of borders and how they addressed, runoff potential. And some things like that. I think one of the bigger ones was the 240-foot buffer between the last treated row and the downwind field edge. They did include other various things in that buffer, roads, mowed fields, and other things like that. But that was one of the bigger things. It did restrict use rates. So we used to be able to use double rates. So if the standard use rate of Ingenia is 12.8 ounces and Extendamax is 22, they basically said you can apply it twice. Either one of those, twice pre-plant, pre-emergence, and twice post-emergence, but you can't go higher than that rate. We used to be able to apply double rates. So if you got a nasty burn down situation, you could go up to twice that rate of those to help you out. So those are, I think, some of the major changes that they made. And barring, I suppose, additional results of lawsuits or EPA re-examining that, and EPA has said they will re-examine, because we have a new administration of EPA, they will re-examine that label. They've said, I think, at the end of this current growing season to see what problems happen and whether they need to reevaluate. And of course, one of the things that's happened in the meantime is a big increase in the use of enlist soybeans, and then also Extend is converting to all Extendiflex over the next year or so. So that actually gives us the potential to spray a lot less dicamba post-emergence, which can help some of those issues. But that's where it sits right now. So we're not going to lose the label. I will say, anyone concerned about that, there will be no loss of that label. I don't see it happening. I don't think the lawsuits can happen that fast. Maybe they can, but I don't see it happening on time for us to lose that label, that current label. So I think use will be in place until June 30th. That's going to be in place. There's no move by ODA to change any of that. ODA is going along with that label. So there are no additional restrictions placed on that by the state of Ohio. And EPA has actually said other states can't change that either at this point.
Yeah, and just a reminder, because this came up at some pesticide trainings, that you do have to still complete that annual training. If you go to pest.osu.edu, towards the bottom of their homepage, they have all of the different products, their training websites. So make sure you get that done as well. So Peggy, Mark mentioned the lawsuits that are going on, and the one that really started this, what led to that, or what the basis was for that label being vacated?
Sure. It was challenged by a group of, I would say, farmers with environmental interests, organics and National Family Farm Coalition led that challenge along with a number of other nonprofit, non-governmental organizations. And they challenged that the procedure for allowing the registrations to move through was flawed in many different ways. And it did go all the way up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which agreed that mainly they had two issues that they focused on up at that level, that the EPA hadn't adequately examined the science, or had, they picked and chose among the different reports and data that they wanted to use and ignored other data pieces and studies. And so that was one concern the Ninth Circuit had, and it really hammered the EPA on that. They also had some other concerns about the social costs of making the decision as it did. And one large part of that argument was that allowing these registrations to proceed were having kind of monopolistic effects on technology and forcing farmers into having to use these products. So those were the two prongs of that Ninth Circuit decision. And in the end, they said because of these and a few other minor concerns they had, they vacated the registrations. And as you know, that fell in June of last year and really caused a lot of mayhem.
Yeah, and you mentioned that monopolistic effect, and Mark mentioned some new products that are going to be available, but also a shift. And I don't know if that's just, farmers wanting more options, which is good, but also concern about actually being able to apply this product. So that label vacating maybe did have some impact on moving farmers' thought process forward and switching products. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I don't think anyone's having any fun with dicamba. I mean, it's a pain in the neck to deal with. And so I think when they were given a platform, and Peggy's right, that the concern was that barring that platform, and Monsanto be Bayer now, basically, that came up in that court case they had in Missouri that they lost. They had internal documents that basically said that this is our chance to basically monopolize the seed market, because people that don't want to use spray dicamba will be forced to buy our soybeans to protect themselves. So that did come out down there. So I think given the opportunity to do enlist, and you had, again, certain co-ops that won't spray dicamba post-emergence period. So you have some limitations. And I'm sure some of these growers have concerns of, I can't really keep this from moving. This isn't fair to my neighbors. I would hope if you would probably have those concerns, given an alternative, they would at least be thinking about that. So they're not losing anything. I mean, they have a variety of platforms now. And the enlist took a while to get going, but it certainly gives them a platform as good as the Extend platform is. And so I think they're taking advantage of that. And then seed companies are driving that too by their offerings, right? So if you have a seed company, it took Corteva, Pioneer a little bit to get going for a couple of different reasons, but now that's a bigger part of their seed base.
So even though we haven't seen that come to fruition as the court was afraid it would, that kind of, technology monopoly, I think the other issues are still there. And so there's now a number of new lawsuits filed against the rewritten label that came out after that Ninth Circuit vacated. And that's the 2020 label by EPA. And so now we have a whole slew of lawsuits, again, bringing in those arguments from the past. So we'll see what happens next with, the labeling. Some of the issues that Mark raised, some of those changes they made on the label are being argued on both sides. On one side, there's the American Soybean Association and the cotton growers are arguing that new label is too restrictive. And on the other side, we have that same group of plaintiffs who were successful in the Ninth Circuit case, the National Family Farm Coalition, saying that the new label was not written based upon the science. And again, saying that EPA is ignoring the studies and is shirking its duty to examine all of that data in writing the new label. So now we have new litigation.
Right. It's interesting. I know the news that came out this week about this from the EPA themselves, basically saying, yes, this was not done right. Like we We ignored certain pieces of data. We were told, people were told they ignored certain pieces of research data, et cetera. So I think they're basically admitting that, we did not follow proper procedure here.
Yeah, and that's something that you had talked about all along when we started to see this. You and the wheat scientists across the Midwest were kind of frustrated with.
Yeah, we were getting asked opinions. We were getting asked for input from EPA to a certain point and then not. And then that EPA, that wasn't even taken into account, I think. And so eventually there isn't, you can't force EPA to take our recommendations. We just gave up. It's a sore spot with wheat scientists. The whole dicamba issue really is not because we don't need good technology. That's not the reason. It's this one's been unmanageable. And then you throw in that news, which we kind of suspected from EPA, it makes us really grit our teeth.
And what's interesting about that, Mark, is that now EPA is saying we feel like we're in a position of legal liability here because, we were already, had our hands slapped by the Ninth Circuit. We rewrote the labels, and we don't know for sure that the new labels were based upon the proper science. We suspect that maybe they weren't. And now if we start allowing extensions, as some of the states have begun asking for those extended dates, we're putting ourselves more at risk of more litigation and more liability for this whole area. So it's kind of an interesting evolution, I think, that we've gotten to.
Yeah, you can see what their concern is. And it's you're a little bit curious if like someone down in the trenches below where that decision was made has all that data and has the right assessment, and knows what that assessment is, but that was not paid attention to, or they never had a chance to even elevate that assessment to where it needed to go, or if they, that was just shut off to begin with. I don't know. It's interesting, and of course, coming into this growing season, just looking at seed sales, we have the potential for less dicamba to be sprayed, especially I think post-emergence. So you could come into the end of this growing season with fewer issues, right? Because of that, and then it would make it look like your label was okay. Maybe, I don't know. That's a kind of a strange situation when maybe it's actually not. This may not be cutting it off. It's just that we're not spraying as much of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So is there a risk of the label being vacated with the current lawsuits again in the middle of June?
Well, there are two different tracks for these lawsuits. There are lawsuits occurring on each side at the federal district court, which would be at a trial level, and those will take a while for anything to happen there. But then each of those parties have also filed suits at the appellate level, and basically what they're asking for there is to review that petition going back to the Ninth Circuit and making those same arguments and saying the court pointed these things out and these flaws are still in place for the 2020 label. So they, in that National Family Farm Coalition case where they did win that argument in the Ninth Circuit, they were asking to be able to go back to the Ninth Circuit and file a petition for review of that. But they're being pushed out of the Ninth Circuit now and joined together with these other cases filed by the American Soybean Association and the cotton growers. And they're going to send those off to a different circuit court of appeals. And because of that movement, it might take long. If they had stayed in the Ninth Circuit, we might have been in the same position again, where the Ninth Circuit could be saying, wait a minute, we still have a problem here. I think it could take longer now that they're moving it off to a different circuit court. And we might not see anything as quickly, but it's still possible that we could get something from them this spring. But the district court decisions, I think those are going to be spinning their wheels for a while.
You have to think that if we had it vacated again, we would still be forced to do the same thing we did this year, which was say, okay, it was vacated, but we have guys with extent beans and they need to be able to spray. So I don't think anyone's going to take away dicamba in that month of June. I'd be really, really surprised.
Yeah, putting us right back in that same position. And there would be another flurry of lawsuits as there was last time. So I think EPA has been clear in saying, the current EPA, that they really want to take a look at this season and reassess. So I think that works in their favor too, as far as not getting another vacation from a court of appeals. Vacation in the legal sense, not in the reasonable sense.
So
They're not
I
the
was gonna
same.
say, man, after this past year, don't we all need a big vacation?
We do. The other thing I think that complicates this is, some of those regulations are still under freeze with the Biden administration coming in. And so that slows things down too, where they're not looking at a lot of them yet. They're in this strange world of being frozen pending further review. So I think a court would be hesitant under that situation, knowing that the new administration is reviewing to go ahead and make a decision right now on it. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think administration of EPA, I think just to be clear, I did actually see today that they apparently lost 1,000 scientists in the past 4 years, which I find to be phenomenal. But they, that core of people that works down there is not affected politically. There's a group of administrators at the top that kind of shift in and out with administration. And so, their potential to go back and look at that, it means that their administrators are willing to do that, I think, and then go back to those scientists and say, okay, give us the information here and let's make sure we do the right assessment. So we've had a change in management, that doesn't mean we've had a change in scientists, because they're basically, scientists are, they're apolitical there, as far as I know. That's a good thing. I'm basically saying that's a good thing.
So one thing we've learned with dicamba over the last few years is you can never really feel safe and confident through the season. So Mark, what kind of recommendations do you have for guys to really be ready for any scenario and be protected against some of this uncertainty with their weed control plans?
You don't necessarily, especially for the, well, I would say especially for the post, but even for the pre, because we have a lot of wind in April. My feeling on that platform is the dicamba has a good use pre-emergence and a burn down for us for Maristale, for example. I think we have fewer issues with it at that time of the year. It's cooler, which means there's probably less volatilization. It doesn't mean it's not drifting, but we don't have as many things for it to affect because not as much is out of the ground, right? You have flowering fruit trees and things like that. So you have fewer issues. So, I mean, if you have a choice about where to use it, I still think that's probably a better choice. If you have the Extend to Flex platform, you certainly have the option once you get into June to look at weather and say, okay, no, this doesn't work for me for dicamba. I mean, I'm not per that label, and that's a pretty restrictive set of weather conditions. So, I can spray glufosinate. I have the option to do that, or, and no one likes to spray post-emergence twice, to look at your weather patterns and say, okay, I don't really like what I'm seeing, or, I've had weeds out of the ground and I do have the option to come back later. So I'm just going to start looking in early June, for example. Let's say we plant late April, early May, and we're hitting early June. Now, we don't spray a lot of post, I don't think, until mid-June, right? I mean, mid to late June, we do a lot of post. We do some earlier, but that's geared on getting big giant ragweed plants and getting all the little ones that have emerged in a lot of cases as well. So you can certainly look at that and say, okay, it's a beginning of June. I'm looking for a window of weather to spray my dicamba. It may be a little bit early. If water hemp's an issue, you can put a residual in with it, right? Residual is not going to help you with Maristale and ragweeds much. And then you have the option to come back and use glufosinate later as a second application. And glufosinate prices have dropped. Now, all this depends on whether you're paying someone to spray and things like that, right, in terms of cost. So, as I said, no one likes to do 2 post applications, but that's certainly one way to manage it, because the other way is, I want to spray dicamba. I'm planning on spraying that. I hit mid-June when I might spray that, and I hit 2 weeks of 90-degree plus weather, right, or wind or whatever, and then I'm out. I hit June 30th and I'm out. So, those are a couple different ways to do it. We would certainly encourage, strong residual programs still. We always do for our tough weeds, but that creates the window you need, right, to do that. So you're not in the situation of everything's coming out. I didn't use a residual, or I didn't use enough, and man, everything's just breaking and I have to spray, right? And you have weather that's not suitable for that. So that's kind of my view on it. Now, our concern as weed scientists is we are spraying a lot. we spray a lot of dicamba, we're going to be spraying more 2,4-D, but we are spraying a lot of glufosinate. And I had the question yesterday on a meeting with a bunch of seed reps, and they said, when are we going to see glufosinate resistance in water hemp? And I said, anytime, any day. I mean, so they found it in Palmer down in Arkansas. So it's coming.
Yeah. So pull any weeds you see come through that program for sure. I mean, I don't know.
Of course, the whole thing on water hemp is you need to do something at the end of the season to stop seed because of that.
Well, that's some good advice. So we appreciate the guidance there. Just make sure you're following the labels, get the training that you need, and keep an eye on the weather. We'll keep an eye on this as those lawsuits, court cases go through to see what happens. Maybe check in with you guys here in a few months to see what's going on. We appreciate your time today, and we'll catch you down the road.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.